I'd like to begin with a prayer, and I'm going to ask Bud if he would honor us and bless us this morning with a prayer.
Oh, Dikashla, Lamaya for another day. Oh, Dikashla, ask for good health for the Lakota out there. Oh, Dikashla, help the Lakota out there have one heart, one mind today. And help us understand the ways of the Lakota out there. Oh, Dikashla, I want to say Palamaya for the people who are putting on this conference and helping us to understand the ways of the Lakota out there. Dakyase.
So if you want to find a seat, and then we'll go ahead and begin with introductions. So with that, I would like to introduce myself briefly. My name is Dr. Valentina Merdanian. I serve as the Oglala District Representative. However, in the beginning of this process, it was through standing committee that appointed 2 council representatives to lead the effort on constitutional reform. And the other representative is Ms. Jackie Sears, Wakbamni District Representative. When we formed the task force, when we were given this responsibility, we went ahead and realized that we couldn't do it on our own. So then we formed a task force. And in our task force, we have Stephanie Leisure, Oglala District Representative. We have Robin Tapio, Pine Ridge Village Representative, and Lisa De Leon, who is Wounded Knee District Representative. From the task force, we developed a strategic plan and initiative regarding constitutional reform. In this, we then moved to create some employment and some continuity, in which we developed 5 teams. And in these 5 teams, we have a facilitator, an admin recorder, a translator or interpreter, if you will, as well as going out to our districts, the 9 districts. We also worked with our people who had knowledge of the treaties, so we hosted meetings for them, as well as our youth. And we had youth summits for our youth to give their input in regards to constitutional reform. And then we started talking after we completed all of the districts, and sometimes we went out twice to a district just to get more information out there because they requested it. And it was all volunteer basis in regards to the hall, the food, and the people who were facilitating the meeting. So with that, I ask you to Also keep in mind that in our teams we have Native Nation rebuilders, and it's part of the Bush Foundation, who are working with 21 of our Native Nations. Through this effort of Native Nation rebuilders, we have 20 rebuilders here on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Of the 20 rebuilders, 50% are participating in constitutional reform, either as a facilitator, a volunteer, in different capacities. They serve as a Native Nation rebuilder as well as for our people in constitutional reform. So I myself am a Native Nation rebuilder. I went through cohort 1. So to speak, we were the guinea pigs for constitutional reform, looking at other tribal nations and how we work with them and doing constitutional reform, roles and responsibilities of tribal government. And so with that, we do have the knowledge, the skills to be able to move it forward. And so with that, we have 5 teams, as I mentioned, and Miss Gina Starr, and I'm going to let her introduce herself because she's one of the team members here. And hopefully Miss Jackie Sears is going to join us. She was to chair the Finance Committee meeting this morning. However, a majority of the council's on travel. So she postponed the Finance Committee meeting, and she'll be joining us hopefully shortly here. So those are the members who are going to be present today for constitutional reform. So Gina?
Hi, my name is Gina Starr comes out. I come from Oglala district. I myself didn't know anything about the Constitution, and basically I grew up not wanting to know, but I got involved with this, and now I'm all over it. I'm one of the admin recorders and pretty much all around. And if you have any questions or need anything, just let me know.
Okay. Thank you, Gina. And I want to say and give a big hand of appreciation to KOLC, because I would like them to introduce themselves. They've been a part of constitutional reform from the beginning, in which they've recorded all of our meetings. You can find that on YouTube. We're going to be streaming live today, as we did yesterday on KOLC, so we're really excited about that. Anything that we do with constitutional reform is documented. So, because this is coming from the people. And in a sense, we're making history because it's coming from the people. And so we'll talk more about that. But at this point in time, I'd like to have the KOLC staff introduce themselves. So.
Hello, my name's Tony Brave. I'm the manager for KOLC. You know, we're glad to be here doing this for the Oyate. And I hope it continues, and the IRA government has always been in question, and I hope something gets resolved through this. Thank you.
My name is Michael Laisbad. I'm from the Porcupine District, and I work underneath Tony. You know, it's really interesting sitting in on all these meetings. Like I said, we've been there from the beginning, so it's really eye-opening for me, and for me to sit, and you can't help but over here and listen in on the meeting. But I really enjoy covering these meetings.
So the cameras are here, and yes, it's live streamed, and we're also waiting for Little Wound High School student government class to be joining us this morning. So they will be here, and we'll let the other cameraman introduce himself.
Thing on. Hey, I'm glad to see you all. My name is Sheldon King. Just happy to see you all. You know, it's a good day. You know, hope you all thank the Creator for, you know, waking up and feeling good today. And it's nice to see you all.
So with that, I see some familiar faces who joined us yesterday, which is really good, but I want to take the time to just briefly go around, say your name and what program you're with, okay? Name and program.
My name is Patricia Ketchastanami. I'm retired.
Arlene Catches the Enemy, Wakpamni District Service Center Manager.
Joanne Sierra, Wakpamni District.
Maxine Charging Thunder, Wakpamni District.
Marilyn Winters, and I work at Job Placement and Training for the Oglala Sioux Tribe, and I'm Pine Ridge District.
Buddy Red Hawk, and I work for Health Education from Pine Ridge District.
Good morning. I'm Cleo Tulance. I work for the OST Higher Education Office as Admin Assistant, and I'm from the Wakpamni District.
Good morning. Debbie Bluebird, Director of Higher Education in Wakpamni District.
Good morning. I'm Susie Mestith, and I'm the Director of the Environmental Protection Program for the tribe.
Good morning. My name is Denise Mestith. I work for the Oglala Sioux Tribal Land Office as the Director.
Good morning. My name is Wilma Koloff. I'm from Pine Ridge District, and I work with OST Special Education.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Ghost, and I work with OST Special Education.
Summer Pleer, I'm from Porcupine, and I work with the Special Education.
My name is Corey Mills. I work with Transportation Motor Fuels.
Good morning. My name is Marlon Cowley. I'm originally from Wounded Knee District, but I am now an enrolled member of Oglala District. I work for Special Education Program.
Good morning. My name is Sam Long Black Cat. I'm originally from the White Clay District, currently living in the Wakpamni District. I'm with the Road Maintenance Program.
My name is Kimberly Pacer, and I work for the Elderly Mills Program, and I'm from Pine Ridge District.
I'm Billy Puim with the Legal Department.
Good morning. I'm Nikki Little White Man, and I work with the Executive Director's Office as an Associate Director for the tribe, and I'm also from Medicine Road District.
Todd Waters, OST Energy Program from Pine Ridge.
I'm Kyle Bourne. I work for OST Support Services as a security officer.
Jerry Goldsper, Support Services.
My name's Dave Livermont, and I'm the Terrell Director, and I'm from Lake Creek District, but I also lived many years in Eagle Nest District.
So with that, as you can see on your agenda, we feel that it's really important to kind of get that frustration out of the way, because through our history, and we'll go through that history, but there's a lot of concerns regarding our Constitution, what we refer to as the IRA government. And so I want to just take a couple minutes to go around and tell us, what do you dislike about the IRA government, and what do you like about the IRA government or the Constitution, okay? Because the Constitution is basically the government. So with that being said, if you just want to raise your hands, and we're going to go around and we're going to document in regards to what are your thoughts regarding the IRA Constitution. So we'll start with what are your dislikes, and we're going to get that mud out of the way. Okay.
Of course. One of the major things that I dislike is the fact that we have a limited, it's defined in there, the limited lease years. It says 5 years, and in today's day and age, we have so much planning to do on our reservation, and it's difficult for our people as entrepreneurs, as homeowners, to fall within that 5-year category. So if we just took that out of there and put it where it needs to be put in a code instead of in the Constitution would be so much better. And then that way we can manage those leases a lot better. That's a dislike. I don't know if I have a like. I have to research that real quick here.
So before we move on, we didn't get to have this gentleman introduce himself. So,
my name is Patrick Janice. I'm the director of the OST Burial Assistance Program. And I guess on that note, the people need a lot of prayers. There's a lot of deaths going on, and a lot of young people. A lot of young people. My Lakota Chaje is Champaglo Hamani. When I was a younger man, I was involved in the Black Hills Sioux Nation Treaty cult in the treaty deal, along with Philip Underbaggage and Pete Swiftbird, Joe Swiftbird, Oliver Red Cloud, these people. So I got to sit in and listen to a lot of those things. And I was made a headsman at that time, but I don't... Today, you know, we have a lot of... But I guess when talking about the IRE government, I think we got to make... I don't know everything in the Constitution and everything, but I think we got to make it our own. We got to make it fit ourselves. And from what I heard from the old men, and what's most important to me, is that we preserve and remember who we are and fashion the government after who we are as a people, the red people. The most important thing was our spirituality, and that means our customs, our cultural ways, our covenant. I guess it sounds Christian, but Lakota people had a covenant with the Great Spirit to be spiritual people. They believed that they were the first human beings ever created, and that's true. And so there was a covenant to be good examples to the rest of humanity on how to be a human being. And so Chief Red Cloud and the old chief always tried to, he preserved our Sundance, our Sweat Lodge. Chanupa was the most important thing. And he hoped that, he knew they were going to break the treaty, the 1868 treaty, in time, but he wanted us not to break it. He wanted us to preserve the families, the Teoshpai. And, you know, everybody complains because everything's in Pine Ridge, they say. That's not true anymore, but that's the way the old chiefs wanted it a long time ago, they tell me. They didn't want the Bureau, our agents who were white at the time, messing around with them out in the district, so they said, okay, we'll come meet in Pine Ridge. We want it to be in Pine Ridge, everything, the offices, everything. And that way we can keep our relationships. We can come in and meet, and we can be relatives. We could renew our, and keep, you know, in touch with each other, because they didn't have radios or newspapers in those days to spread news. So they got together, they met, not just over tribal things, but of things of importance to them. But they're looking at me like, ah, damn it, we got to move now, so I'm going to shut up. Well, thank you.
So it's good input, and we have two more ladies joining us this morning, so we're going to just take a couple minutes for them to just introduce themselves quickly, their name and what program or community you're from.
Good morning. My name is Carolyn Newholy, and I'm from the Little Grass Creek community in Oglala district.
Hi, my name is Stormy Williams, and I'm from Little Grass Creek in Oglala too.
Well, welcome. Any more comments in regards to the dislikes? If not, then what about the likes? Are there any likes in regards to what do you see as beneficial with the current constitution that we have in place?
Back in the 70s, I attended college in Duke University in Davis, California, and we had a couple instructors there that encouraged us to get your college degrees and go back home and fight for your land and fight for your people. And so later on, a couple years later, after attending college, I went back and I started going to community meetings and district meetings, and I was taking college courses at the College Center in Eagle Nest District there, and as a student rep, and I started attending council meetings as well. Elijah Willenhorst from Eagle Nest District got elected as tribal chairman, and so I, with his permission, I lobbied the tribal council for 2 years, and I did it to lead the way for young people, especially for the young people with college degrees. And I think I missed one council meeting in 2 years. And I remember the story was G. Wayne Tapio, he was on the tribal council from Pine Ridge. And he got the floor and he says, we're gonna have to cancel this meeting because Dave Livermont isn't here. And anyway, but it was one of the highlights of my life. There was 27 councilmen back then. And Elijah was a professional college-educated man, and he was treated with respect. And the meetings were held in respectful manners, and most of them were held out in the districts. That was kind of the policy of Elijah, was to have the meetings out in the districts. And so I got to experience that, you know, and now things are different. It's a lot different now, and I think it's really changed for the worst, you know, in a lot of ways. But we can turn things around. We can. The Constitution is an old document, and it needs to be changed. It really does. And so yesterday I suggested that, you know, we look at other tribes' constitutions and also look at the nations in Canada as well. And also look at Oglala Lakota College. Look at their mission statement. They have a really strong mission statement. And I think our Constitution should also be written in a similar format, because the way it's written now is weak, in my opinion. So that's one of my suggestions, is to try to strengthen the language that's in the Constitution so it does fit the people, like Mr. Judicial suggested. Thank you.
I'm Rusty Merdanian. I guess I'm supposed to introduce myself, but I just have one suggestion. Would be for our elected leaders. We have all our tribal programs with stickers and stuff on. Our elected leaders should have an assigned vehicle to represent us out there, and they should be proud to be our leaders and have these to go out there and to show our people, to show the world, hey, we're elected leaders for the Oglala Lakota Nation. It's time our leaders step up and start leading by example and not just talk. Everywhere else, the other tribes that have things going, in the military, there's accountability. And that's what we're lacking here, is accountability. We're always chasing each other's tails, running in circles. And our people continue to suffer out there. Nothing has changed until we get accountability and leadership by example. Thank you.
Good. Okay. We'll take one more and then we'll move on with our presentation.
I'm a landowner, and one thing I don't like about it is they mail us the, where our land's supposed to be and this and that, and I don't really understand it. And one thing I would like is maybe them have a meeting with landowners once a month and let them know what's going on with their land. And from what I look at mine, I mean, I get like 2 cents for my land. And, is my land really worth that? There's a lot of questions I need to ask about that because I don't understand.
So when we get into land, Article 10, that's when we're going to discuss a lot of this, and where should that revision be, and as far as the code, we can make that stipulation to be in the code, okay? So with that, we are going to move on. It's important that we understand. The computer is saying, no, we're not moving on right now. Okay. So with that, it's important to understand where we've been, where we are currently, and where do we want to be in the future as a people. And so understanding why did these things come about? Why do we have the IRA government in place? And we've been participating in this government for 72 years. So in regards to changes, this is history in the making, because understanding what we've been through and to make those changes is a great step forward, not just for this generation, but for those future generations of our people. So let's go back in time and look at where did this all stem from? Well, it began right here. In 1778, when we were so-called discovered as indigenous people of this country. And in a majority of what we call civilized tribes, the confederation of those nations, they were the first treaties between the United States and those tribes. That is on record, okay? And so these treaties go way back when we had treaties with the kings and the queens in regards to our relationship. So they recognized us as independent nations, because what is a treaty? A treaty is a contract. It's a binding agreement. And in that contract is the stipulations of rights. So that's what a treaty is. And then moving on, what had happened is as the invasion of the immigrants coming to this country, they realized what was the resources available. And so from the resources, they pushed our people westward. And that continued to happen. And it was primarily for the Ohio Valley. Now, what was in the Ohio Valley? Transportation, resources, land. It was just a monopoly in regards to the wealth of this nation. And so that set the Cherokee Nation being pushed out of that area, as well as what they refer to as the civilized tribes. As a result of that came into place Marshall's Trilogy. And Marshall's Trilogy, these 3 cases set federal Indian law, is what we know today is based upon these 3 cases. And from there, they established what is known today as the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but prior to that was called the Indian Affairs. And if you go back in history, in European history, and you read that, Benjamin Franklin wrote a lot in regards to Indian affairs. So they had 2 Indian agents, one for the West, one for the East. And the U.S. Constitution was based upon the confederations of those nations. And he talks about it, Ben Franklin talks about it, saying that the U.S. government made a big mistake in how they formed their government, because with these civilized tribes, they are matriarchal in their government system. However, the U.S. government left that out. It became patriarchal. So as time progressed and more resources were sought after, we were under the War Department. and then back to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So with that, U.S. population grew. By the 1850s, nearly all eastern tribes were moved to the center of the country. Relocation of these tribes, and many of these tribes were forced, where there were maybe two warring tribes, but they were forced to live within a confines, and they had to be able to work with each other and coexist with one another. And so what did that do to the Ocheti Shakoi? Well, we began to sign an agreement with the federal government, what is known as the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty. This was the first time ever that the federal government recognized our boundaries. So the 1851 defines our boundaries as the Great Sioux Nation. So, and that's what it talks about. It talks about the land rights, but it's only rights. You got to remember, it's rights and not law. Shortly after, you look at that territory is known as the Great Sioux Nation, was diminished by the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. Now, what did the Fort Laramie Treaty provide to our people? It provided us more rights, such as the Commerce Clause, those trust annuities that we know today is TPA, Trust Priority Allocations, that is drawn down through the 638 programs. That's what the 68 did, the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. So it's important that we keep in mind, how does our government support these contracts that we signed with the federal government? Moving on, there was a lot of concern and discussion amongst our leaders because we continued to see the elimination of the land base to our people based upon the first agreement, the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty. And our people were not deemed as competent, but we were deemed as wards of the government, that we had childlike minds. And in fact, we weren't even considered human at that time because we did not adopt Christianity. And so in this process was to assimilate because they could not annihilate us. And our leaders fought very hard for our people and our rights based upon these agreements. They stood strong with what we talk about, our cornerstone, our covenant with the Creator. And we stood strong with prayer. And when we made these agreements, we held true to them. Now, why did our people hold so true to these agreements when the federal government broke one agreement after the other? And that is because we agreed with prayer. We had the chanupa there, and we offered up these prayers. And it was a binding agreement that we also had with the Creator. So as a result of that, the federal government wanted to continue to further diminish our land base. Now, our ancestors, when they looked at this and they thought about it, because it wasn't so defined, we didn't say land coordinate 180 north and 160 south. We didn't do that. We said from one mountain range to the other mountain range. Now, why did we do that? It's because we knew the ecosystem between that mountain range and the other mountain range. And we knew what resources were available to our people. And we understood that, and we respected that. Federal government did not understand that. So they implemented these actions to further diminish our land base. And primarily was the Dawes Act beginning in 1887. This is where the Allotment Act comes into place. This is where they started dividing up what is known as the Great Sioux Nation into individual allotments. And this concept of owning land individually was totally foreign to our people. How can we own something that does not belong to us, but belongs to our future generations? As a result, we weren't considered citizens. In the Dawes Act, they tried to make us citizens of this country. And why do you think they wanted to make us citizens of this country under their government? Since we were getting land. Taxes. Taxes. To pay on the allotment pieces given to our people. We had a time frame in which we were to pay the taxes on the allotted pieces assigned to our families. And so, with that being said, our people said, no, hold on, wait now. This is your agreement. And then we also had Congress, and a majority of the Congress were Protestants. And because they were Protestants, they said, well, we need to assimilate them first. And so they started assigning religions to our reservations, to our areas. And they were sending in the different divisions of Christianity to our people. So it goes back to that. And since we didn't fully accept Christianity in that assimilation movement, the United States government decided not to make us citizens until 1924. And that is because our people served in World War I. So today, when we look at 1889, even that time frame, we lost as a people over 21 million acres of what was considered reservation land under the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty. Because our people protested and wanted to have the freedom to leave these boundaries that kept getting smaller and smaller, it led to a lot of confrontation. And the 68 treaty was primarily to make peace so that there would be rite of passage for the military troops and for the settlers. And so, because of our rights being violated, then was resulted the Battle of Greasy Grass, the Battle of Little Bighorn. And because of that, it allowed for further expansion into the Black Hills. We had a lot of squatters coming into the Black Hills, started mining the resources. Gold was discovered, and this is when they took away Haisapa, the Black Hills. So with that, the government wanted to, okay, they took all our resources, what they considered as valuable resources, and then they said, okay, work through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, we're going to give you these programs. Health, work, roads, homes, schools, to bring back what they say economic development for our people. And the president at that time commissioned for a study to be done on the reservations. And this study that was done brought to the surface the same realities and the same statistics we deal with today. Unemployment, the social ills of alcoholism, the dropout rate in schools were the same issues that we faced back then. And with that being said, the BIA steps in and says, well, wait now, but we're the experts on Indian education. We're the experts on their natural resources, their forestry, their land, their minerals. And they didn't want to give up that responsibility. So government stepped in and said, well, we're going to develop this new deal known as the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. And so when we talk about the IRA, yes, it was enforced upon our people. However, it did do a lot of good things for our people, because given that time frame, our people weren't afforded the opportunity to challenge the federal government in court. Because our people, our leaders did fight for the Black Hills, but they could not get representation from the BIA to hire attorneys to fight for the Black Hills. So what did it do? It was supposed to develop a trust relationship between the federal and tribal governments, promote self-government, and in this process, 100 tribes lost their identity because of that federal registry and giving them a government. And the BIA started the relocation program. Today, 40% of our people still reside in the cities. But that's starting to change because a lot of them are coming home. They're coming home to retire. So, the abuses of termination and relocation period led to these reforms, what they call the self-government, the Indian Civil Rights Act, the Self-Determined and Education Assistance Act, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, and of course NAGPRA, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So with that today, that's how we ceded to the boundaries today known as the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And with that being said, do you notice how checkerboard this area is? And you see it scattered throughout the reservation. And I'm just wondering, given the land buyback, what this map is really going to look like today for the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And so we requested that map. Hopefully we will get a map that will allow us to see that in a fuller picture. So moving on to the IRA. This is the fun part. Look what it did as the tribal government. Look where we are. We're in line with the federal government. And where do we sit? Above state government. Now, based upon our Constitution, we've never exercised that authority as a tribal government. And what does this lend back to is the fact that we have treaties in place, those trust responsibilities. And that's why we are in line with the federal government. So, under Title I, what it did is allow us to pass our own tribal laws, charter tribal businesses, implement education, and Indian preference. Anywhere else in this country, if you try to segregate and give Indian preference, that's known as discrimination. But that's what the IRA allowed us to do, was claim Indian preference. It also allowed us to do repeals on our allotment system, and they set aside monies for new trust lands, and to establish our own court system. Because prior to that, what was enforced upon us was the Major Crimes Act. And this was the true test by Crow Dog in ex parte. When Crow Dog tried to practice our traditional form of law. And we have 4 forms of law. However, the US government wanted retribution rather than peacemaking. So through retribution came the Major Crimes Act. And that's what was enforced upon our people. That's why our crimes go federal. However, it allowed us to form our own court system on our reservations. Now, with that being said, the act itself of 1934, how many of you know that there was 17 articles in this act? Did you all know that? There's 17 articles in this act. Where did the blood quantum come from in our enrollment? Anybody? From this act. This act said that our blood quantum should be 1/4. That's where it came from. Was from this act in our enrollment. So, with the IRA in place, what it did is it stopped the erosion of our land base. That was the big point of the IRA government, was to stop the erosion of our land base. And then to be able to develop our own land and resources, form businesses, establish a credit system, granted certain rights to home rule, and provide vocational education and other purposes. But it also gave us the right to sue the federal government. And that's why it went to the Supreme Court in the 1980s for the Black Hills. But what they were ruling on wasn't the land to give back to the people, to the Ochete Shakoi. It was ruling on how much they gave per acre for the Black Hills. So that's what they were ruling on back in 1980. Supreme Court ruled it was a great injustice in this country for the Native Americans. That was the ruling. So they set aside this IM account, this BIA account, and put all this money in there based upon what they had settled on per acre that they were to give to our people for taking the Black Hills illegally. Okay? How many of you remember the Enron scandal that happened in the late 90s? Remember, it was on the news morning, noon, and night? Well, during the same time frame of the Enron scandal, there was millions of dollars missing from this BIA account. And did you hear it on the news morning, noon, and night? No, you did not. Was our tribal government aware of this money missing? Was our treaty groups aware of this money missing? So it's good to keep in mind what this particular act help our people to do. Here are, remember I said 17 articles? Here are the primary points. Was the trust period, the surplus of lands, the prohibition of Indian land sales. No more can the BIA superintendent come in and determine land sales as done in the past by previous BIA superintendents. Rights of the Department of Interior, Secretary of Interior directives coming from DC. And this is really big because there's been a lot of revisions within the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so today, this has a seat at the table in Washington, whereas in the past they did not. Recognition of new reservations. You saw a lot of those mission bands in California started developing because of this. The allotment and homestead public domain. The establishment of funds for tribes, loans, and education. Indian preference. Claims against the U.S. Tribe sharing reservations. This is what I talked about, those warring tribes that were forced into one area and had to share it. So they came up with a way that they can be able to share that reservation and share one government. They gave us constitutional powers, tribal incorporations, and then, of course, non-applications. So with that, that's a brief history in a nutshell regarding where we've been as a people when it came to the Indian Reorganization Act. Okay? So now we're getting into the fun part. It's time to get out your surveys, get out the Constitution, because we're going to start. Now, our Constitution has been revised in 1969, 1985, 1997, and the last, most recently, was in 2008. And we looked as the task force for the revisions of these three years, 69, 85, and 97, and we could not find anything concrete on file. So we didn't know what revisions happened during that time frame other than from people who took part in it, who are trying to find those documents and then will share those with us in regards to those revisions. Because a lot of things were enacted that was passed through the Secretary of Interior in regards to those revisions, but were never adopted by Tribal Council. And so we're learning all of this, but it's all verbal right now until we can get the documentation. The only thing that we can speak to is the 2008 revisions. So the last revisions was in 2008, and how many of you knew that there were 17 articles in our Constitution? No? Well, there is 17. And of those 17, Article 2 got changed, Article 4 got changed, Article 5 got changed, that was judicial powers. Article 12, they added Article 12. And what is Article 12? It's our Bill of Rights as a people. And with that, we also had Article 13, responsibilities of the Executive Board. Article 14, qualifications of tribal representatives, got revised. I believe that the oath of office, they condensed it into just one section, and it just reads the oath of office. Meeting and procedures, which is Article 16, and then also they added it's not even one sentence, a complete sentence, it's just there, it's not even a paragraph, is the National Sioux Council. So those are the 17, or those 8 articles were revised in 2008 and was voted on. But when I say making history, is that it is you, the people, who are going to make the revisions for 2018. 10 years later, it is finally coming from the people that these revisions will happen. So, let's start with our preamble. Jackie, you want to read the preamble out loud?
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Sorry I'm late, but things come up. It says, we, the Oglala Sioux Tribe of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, in order to establish a more perfect organization, promote the general welfare, conserve and develop our lands and resources, secure to ourselves and our posterity the power to exercise certain rights of home rule not inconsistent with federal laws and our treaties, and in recognition of God Almighty and His divine providence, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the Oglala Sioux Tribe.
So, are you guys good with this preamble? Do we want to say that we are in recognition of God Almighty and His divine providence? Should we leave that language alone or should we change it? Okay, what should we change it to? So let me give you an example. We've been going out to all of the 9 districts. We went out a couple of times with those who have knowledge of the treaties and also from our youth.
Comment.
And so this is an example of what some of our people had suggested our preamble change to. And that is, we, the people of the Oglala Lakota Nation, in order to preserve our sovereignty, enrich our culture, achieve and maintain a desirable measure of prosperity and blessing of freedom, acknowledging with humility and gratitude the goodness, aid, guidance of sovereign ruler of the universe, in permitting us to do so, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the government of the Oglala Lakota Nation. This is just an example of what the people shared with us. This is just one example. So you can give us your thoughts as to what you think it should look like.
Excuse me, can we take out, it's possible, the sovereign ruler of the universe? A lot of our Lakota elders refer to them as the creator. Take out the sovereign ruler of the universe and guidance of the creator.
Okay. So add the word creator. Okay.
Any more comments?
Anything else? We got two more.
We, the people of the Oglala Lakota Nation, in order to preserve our inherent sovereignty, enrich our culture, achieve and maintain a desirable measure of prosperity and blessings of freedom. I'd like to just inject inherent sovereignty in there.
Okay.
And the rest kind of, no, it don't flow, it don't say justice to our people.
Well, in the original, it talks about conserving and developing our lands and resources. So, you know, that's kind of, it's about the territories, it's about land, it is about our spirituality and our freedom. So I'd like to see something in there that conserves and develops our land resources and promotes our culture, our heritage, our language, our traditions.
Okay. Those are all real good suggestions. Anything else? It was mentioned yesterday that they said, you know, we're only a sub-band. So, from the Ochatishakoy, the Tituma.
So along with what Denise said on the conserving and the lands and natural resources, it should put in there, protect and preserve our environment. You know, it's along the same.
Okay. Okay.
Boundaries of the reservation. This is just for the boundaries of the reservation. Shouldn't we somehow acknowledge that we're the sovereign of, I guess, our tribal or original territories too? I think this kind of gives us, gives us something for our children to encourage them and promote their, I guess, their future.
Okay. So original boundaries. Okay.
Just a quick little something. I agree with what Ms. Mesteth is talking about. And to go back to everything, you know, I myself don't like to be called a Sioux, Malakota, you know. We need to establish that in our perfect title, include that into our preamble as well as defined our original 1851 boundaries. Our 1851 boundaries goes all the way down into Omaha and then along the North Platte River, and then it also dips down into northeastern Colorado, and it hooks up with the Powder River in Colorado and then goes up to the Little Missouri, you know, the rest. But yeah, we need to establish our perfect title and maintain our boundaries and our way of life in that preamble, however it's worded.
So when we move into territory, then we can talk about those boundaries, those original boundaries.
I would like to also maybe, I guess myself would like to see something in there where maybe where it talks about protecting our sacred sites on our reservation. Because myself, I see a lot of buildings going up on places where I was, told that there was sacred stuff happening, sacred ceremony grounds, or there's sacred burial sites there, and it goes back to what Denise and Susie was saying, protecting the land and all that, because that's part of what we need to do is we need to protect the lands from having that stuff coming in and happen, because we run into a lot of unmarked burial sites, So I'd like to see something maybe protect historical sites on the reservation.
Oh, okay. Would we be able, do we have the power as a tribe to stop trust land from going into fee patent land? Because a lot of our people get ripped off from white ranchers and, can we do that? Because I know the Navajo Nation, they don't let any of their land go out of trust and they still got their whole reservation. I don't know why we have that.
So when we get into Article 10, we can talk more about that, especially with the leasing. And then we can also put provisions like in our code that makes it a lot harder to take land out of allotment and make it deeded. And as tribal nation, it is easy to take land out of allotted and to put it into trust, but it's so hard to take it from trust and make it back to allotted. So that's one of our processes that we're dealing with right now at the tribal level. So when we get to Article 10, we can have more of that discussion, okay? So keep in mind, through those revisions, those 4 revisions of our Constitution, our preamble remained the same from 1936. And this is the language we've been operating by for 72 years. So with that, when we talk about prosperity, power to exercise certain rights, and we talk about home rule not inconsistent with federal law and our treaties in recognition of God Almighty and His divine providence. So that was the language that we used, and we limited ourselves to just the Oglala Sioux tribe. When we think about it, we didn't claim as being part of a bigger confederation of nations of the Oceti-Sakowin. We don't recognize that, and as a people, we should remember where we come from. Territory. This is the good stuff that you guys were talking about as well. So this is what it says in our Constitution. Where's Miss Jackie?
Right here.
Okay. I said I'm getting to the point in my life where I need bifocals, so it's really hard for me to read this print.
The jurisdiction of the Oglala Sioux Tribe of Indians shall extend to the territory within the original confines of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation boundaries, as defined hereafter, added thereto under the law of the U.S., except as may be otherwise provided by the law of unrestricted lands, to regulate the inherence of property, real and personal, other than allotted lands within the territory of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation.
So do we leave it? Do we change it?
Once again, when we talk about ourselves, it's important, like you said, to know who we are and where we come from. And this little statement here doesn't represent me at all. It describes me as a prisoner of war, and it tells me that I cannot cross that boundary there. So for me and my family, who have fought for this land for a long, long, long time, I would say bust them boundaries in the confines of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, wherever that is, bust them wide open and claim the whole entire 1851 treaty territory in the Oglala Sioux tribe.
So this is an example of what we gathered from, and like I said, it's just an example of information that we gathered. The boundaries of the Oglala Lakota Nation territory, okay, so we say territory, shall be those described by the patents of the 1851 and the 1868 Fort Laramie treaties, diminished only by the Dawes Act of 1887.
The 1851 and 1868 treaty do not fit well in the same sentence. What we should do and what needs to be done is to scrap the whole entire 1868 treaty. Throw it out, it doesn't belong. That started to diminish our people. So 51 is fine. You know, that's according to what I was taught.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
Hi, sorry to hog the mic. So, you know, the territories have to be recognized no matter what, but we still have the boundaries of the reservation, and our jurisdiction of the tribe is within those boundaries that exist now. So recognizing that those were our original territories and serving and making that known throughout beyond our years here. I'd like to say that also on the inheritance of regulating the inheritance, that should be in a code and not in the Constitution.
Okay. Yep. Anybody else? Okay.
Did you get all the copies?
Membership. Right now, in Article 2 of our Constitution, it defines the membership. Section 1, membership of the Oglala Sioux tribe shall be automatic when, subsection A, the person's name appears on the official rolls of the Oglala Sioux tribe of the Pine Ridge Reservation as of April 1st, 1935, or if the person's name appears on any correction made within 5 years after the adoption Constitution on January 1936. Subsection B, a child is born to any member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. Section 2, the tribal council shall have the authority to adopt laws covering future membership. So that's what how we define who we are and our citizenship as a people. So membership, there was a comment made yesterday, membership is like having a member to a golf club, a membership to a golf club versus citizenship. So what is that, you know, just the language in itself. Yes, ma'am.
Sign your name and then take a packet. Like their whole packet and then a survey and
I think this too should have a code in there where a lot of our babies that are being born today don't get enrolled right away. So there should be a code under this to expedite those. You know, in the early years, I remember it was automatic when there's a baby born at the hospital. It was already considered enrolled. It's not happening today. So that's what I would suggest that.
So there is an enrollment code that's in place, and the people who draft this code is composed of individual members, 9 members, selected by their communities to represent the enrollment committee. The enrollment committee has been working on revising the code, the enrollment code, and as you said, you were automatically enrolled. If you were born, you were added on to the census. Today, with the enrollment code, they focus on basically a child born to any member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. So that's what the code is enforcing today. But there's been discussions in the communities about blood quantum, and because blood quantum used to be in place, 1/4. And some of our regulations in education or some of the programs, you have to prove that you're 1/4. And it goes back to what was established with the IRA in 34. So, you know, there was a lot of discussion around blood quantum, but keep in mind in the enrollment, whether you're full, half, or 1/4, the monies aren't appropriate per the enrollment. What it's appropriate is based upon the treaties and those trust responsibilities, and the federal government, that formula is set by them, and they determine what that formula is. Now we can go and try to negotiate those monies, but it doesn't mean that we're going to meet the enrollment number. However, other tribal nations are really pushing this change. For example, you know, we heard earlier that we need to learn about other constitutions, other tribal nations' constitutions. Well, as rebuilders and as a task force, we researched other Native nations' constitutions. And when we looked at their enrollment, for example, the Cherokee Nation, the Navajo Nation, they really push on descent and lineage because it has impacted their enrollment numbers. And they say, oh, but we have a limited resource. We can't help everybody. But the reality is that if you show a higher population, then you're able to negotiate in regards to those resources. So it's a double-edged sword in regards to this. So I strongly encourage you to think about it and give your input and what you think. How do we define ourselves? How do we define our citizenship? Whether they exist on the reservation or off the reservation, how do we define that? Any thoughts? I got one. Oh. Go ahead. Go ahead.
When, well, I'm a member of the Black Hills Sioux Nation Treaty Council also. And back when Oliver Red Cloud was alive, we discussed membership. A while back, back in the 50s or 60s, I remember the Treaty Council met, and it was come down to you know, and everybody but one person voting for full blood enrollment or membership. But that one vote that broke everything was when a child, this person's granddaughter or daughter, went off to school someplace and brought back Washichula's baby. And so that one person voted, you know, he can't, you know, vote for full blood. And so it all rolled down to here. Back then, had it been dealt with, we wouldn't be dealing with it today. So what I was talking with Oliver about is defining membership as anybody born or living within the boundaries of our 51 territories, what we were talking about at the time. Blood quantum, that's a dangerous tool, you know, to use. You know, it's genocidal in point, you know. So if we leave it back to our communities, because our communities are our family and our family knows who's who, then we can use that, you know, as a way of defining membership.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment. You know, we have some families here, and as the service center manager, I see this occurring a lot, is that we have, you know, our membership, and then say they were married off the reservation or whatever, and they had their children, and so I think in our Constitution it used to say something about, it's probably still in there, about, or maybe not the Constitution. I remember Floyd Hand was talking about this a few years back. He was saying that the government, because they established this rule, they were going to go back to the lineage of your family, and there had to be a blood quantum in there, and you had to have, to change the vote, there had to be a certain percentage of people that said, we want to change this vote. We don't want that to happen, you know. And I think that ties in with the families that, you know, they go out and their kids are maybe enrolled in another tribe, and they come back here and then they can't get no services, you know. And to me, that is really unfair. That needs to be addressed somehow. I'm not sure how it should be addressed, but I feel like it's a big problem and it needs to be addressed, because, you know, if maybe a residency requirement or something, you know, they're here so many years or whatever, then they get assistance too, you know, just an idea.
So there was discussion in some of the communities regarding, you know, if they're going to enroll. In the past, they used to have to reside here for a year before they can enroll, and then that was abolished. And so there has been changes in our enrollment code throughout the decades that affects, you know, the lineage portion of it. So right now, this is the way it's stated. The enrollment code supports the way this article is written, and it's focused on lineage. These are some of the suggestions that came from the people, and that was that all citizens of the Oglala Lakota Nation should be original enrollees or descendants of original enrollees listed on the Dawes Commission rolls or their descendants. So that talks about descendancy from the original rolls. And yesterday somebody talked about a living roll, and that we should keep a living roll of our members who are on our enrollment. They also talked about saying that we're all a distinct group of people, and that we don't recognize other tribal nations. For example, say my dad's Hunkpapa and my mom's Oglala. Well, they're only going to recognize the Oglala part in my enrollment. So I'm half Oglala, I'm half Hunkpapa. Do you see? They're not, even though it's part of the Ochete Shakoi, we're only recognizing the sub-band of Oglala in our enrollment in the descendancy. Exactly, on our tree when we do the application. And on there, if you look at your enrollment cards, it still shows your blood quantum. And that's based upon that family tree. So these are some of the suggestions that were given to us. I'm not going to read them verbatim, but Is there anything else that you guys can think of?
These other tribes that were our sisterly tribes, our people always married into these other tribes because we were so scared of incest that we never married into each other. So it should be by, if you have a blood of Oglala in you, then that's the way we should go.
Okay.
So we had this discussion before at my house, and we talked about how we all came from one Great Sioux Nation, and we should have one enrollment in the Great Sioux Nation, because at some point in time we have relatives up in Standing Rock and Cheyenne River, and so we should have dual enrollments, or have one big enrollment office, and you can identify exactly what territory you occupy by saying we live in the Great Oglala Nation in Standing Rock Nation instead of the Oglala Sioux tribe. So just talking about everybody being enrolled in one great big, I guess, yeah, Ochaki Shakoi.
Okay. And Ms. Gina over here is taking all your comments, and we're documenting those thoughts and those suggestions, but we strongly encourage you, what we're talking about here is please put it on that piece of paper in front of you called a survey, so that we have documentation and proof. This is what the people told us. This is what the people want, just like what we're doing right here based upon these suggested changes. Okay, governing body, Article 3. Jack.
Section 1 through Section 10 describes the governing body of the Tribal Council. Section 1, the governing body of the tribe under this Constitution shall be a council which shall be composed of councilmen chosen by a secret ballot by qualified voters of the tribe, which council shall hereafter be known as the Oglala Sioux Tribal Council. Section 2, each community of the reservation as follows shall be entitled to representation on the Tribal Council according to population as hereinafter provided.
And then it lists out the districts, right? But if you look on there, in 97, this is where those changes came about. So if you look under Oglala, which is the first one, it says the Tribal Council shall describe boundaries by ordinance with local participation through district hearings. So the boundaries are yet not defined or accepted within this Constitution. So what about Section 1? Do we leave it as is? I know you ladies are dying to say something.
I'm from the Oglala district and the community of the Oglala Juniors. As far as I know, from what my father, Dave Blackcat, was talking about, he said that all of our communities know our boundaries. We have definite boundaries, and that shouldn't be manipulated by tribal council or any other government. So I think that we should have the communities define our boundaries.
Okay. So Section 1, do we leave, or do we need to update the language?
Well, I was hoping that councilmen, the word councilmen would be removed and just put council, because we know now today that there's many leaders out there and they're of different genders. So recognizing and honoring our women as well, women leaders. Governing body of the Constitution. Okay, Susie wants to add something.
No, I was just wondering why in section 1, chosen by secret ballot. I mean, we all know it's, you have the right to vote, and we know it's secret. So when you say secret ballot, it just kind of makes you feel like, I don't know, I can't explain it.
So I think what they were trying to define was the process of how they were going to select the council representatives at that time. But keep in mind today, because those boundaries are not listed or defined within the Constitution, means that should we be elected at large? Should anybody have the right to contest those votes? Or I can go vote in Kyle if I wanted to. And who's going to tell me I'm wrong? Because it doesn't say that up here. So with that, hold on. I have two.
Are you saying that it's in existence the way it is today? But it's not happening that way, though. Well, why do we need an election board then? You know, it's contrary to what it says up there.
So I think she had.
Yeah. Not me. Cool.
Okay, so what I'm just saying is that Section 2 hasn't been defined, okay, according to the Constitution. However, we all know in each of our districts, we have a constitution. In our district constitutions, we define our boundaries, right? Each of our communities within our districts have a constitution and they define their boundaries as well, right? However, the way it's worded right here is it's leaving it up to tribal council to have a meeting with the district, to have district hearings to determine those boundaries, and so that those boundaries are recognized. And right now, that process hasn't been done, so therefore, there is no district boundaries according to our Constitution.
It was my understanding that the district boundaries were in the original Constitution. But back then they called them farm districts. And back in the, I guess it'd be during, trying to remember the years. It was back in the, it was back during the Elijah Willenhorst administration. Siebert Youngbear was working for the tribe back then, and he had these maps of the district boundaries. They were big wall maps, and they had them in the tribal building on the walls, right outside the chairman's office, vice chairman's office. And so it's my understanding the original Constitution had boundaries, district boundaries.
It did, but it got revised in 1997. And in 1997, this is the result of it. However, it's my understanding, what was shared with me yesterday, is that they did define the district boundaries in 1997, and it did go to referendum vote, it did pass, but it was never accepted and implemented within the Constitution. That is our understanding. Until we get the documentation, we are at this level right now. And that is what it says, is this hasn't happened yet.
What I dislike about it is the district, you can be from 2 districts. Your mom can be from, let's say, Wounded Knee District, and my dad's side of the family's from Wakabamni District. And I've been off the reservation, and I went to school and became part of Wakabamni District. But for some time, it was a challenge vote whenever I did vote. But now recently, I moved back to Wounded Knee District, so it's going to be another challenge vote. So my idea is kind of like a dual with the boundaries. My idea is maybe we should vote the governing body, have like a choice, dual choice of it, because our families most come from 2 different separate districts, and you know people from both of those districts. That might be good for your community.
So right now, the current process is you reside in a district, you're usually on their census, their enrollment. When they do the enrollment update, what they call the census in the districts, but really that's an enrollment update. And for example, in Oglala District, in our constitution, we are to update our census every 5 years, a true census, not an enrollment update, but a census. What the election office does is they go to the enrollment office and then they get the enrollment list from each of the districts, right? Okay, so what happens is that if you're residing in that district, then you enroll in that district so you can get the services from that district in which you reside. And that's how the process works. And so if you're on that census, that's where you vote, okay? Now, given that there's no boundaries, and the census also determines the number of representatives for the population. It says 1,000, okay? So if there's no boundaries, then how do they determine a census? And then how do they determine their population? So these are all the questions that came out in our conversations in the districts.
Well, I just have a question. What would it have to do to redo the boundaries? Because, for example, long time ago they had different communities per district. Oglala has Slim Buttes, Payabia, Oglala Junior, things like that. And then that's how they did their census, whoever was in that community long back then. So, maybe we can try figure out our boundaries and go that route and put them back into separate communities within that district. It's just what I have a little question on.
Okay. Hold on, I have a comment over here.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is we need to give the districts that power. Reword it and put the districts in there, because the districts already do a lot of work in that area. And if you go to each district, they know what their boundaries are, And so in order for it to progress and move forward, that power should go to the districts.
And I'm still a bit confused by this, because we have an election board that is in operation, and each district pays that election. But if you're saying that this is what is going on today, or it's in the Constitution, then you're illegal. You're doing things illegally.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. It's just that I questioned this in the beginning when I came onto council, because of looking at the Constitution and knowing what's in the Constitution under Article 3. So knowing that, I said, why aren't we elected at large? Because right now, there's no boundary set up. So we should have been elected at large. And with the election code, see, that goes back to the election code. And every district will pay the election office if they don't have their own election code already, okay? So they will pay for the election to run at the same time as the tribes. And that's what the districts were doing. And so with that being said, I just want to make one more point, is that in our district, we have Oglala Junior and Retchert Table. Now their constitutions were approved by Congress. Okay, so any revisions done to that constitution has to go through Congress, any amendments. Therefore, the tribe should be recognizing those two as districts and not as communities within Oglala District. The other thing is in the past, because they were recognized by Congress, they had district representatives in the past. So all of this confusion has diminished Article 6.
I was just going to point out also that back in the 70s also there were maps of the communities, wall maps of the communities. And as an example, in Eagle Nest District, where my family was allotted land, the community out there was called Medicine Butte Community. And this is adjacent to the Rosebud Reservation over there by Corn Creek. And so there was communities back then that aren't active today. And so I think we need to look at the original Constitution, the boundary lines, and I think you need to look at the original communities, you know, and on and on. And it's not an easy task to do because there's new communities, there's, you know, the districts have their own constitutions now that have changed the boundary lines. As example, Lake Creek District and Pass Creek District. Originally, Pass Creek District extended all the way over to the Rosebud line. And then now Lake Creek District is a lot larger than it used to be. And so anyway, but the other thing I want to make one comment is that it'd really be good at these meetings, at least some of them, to have some of our tribal attorneys here, or somebody like that really knows the history a lot better than most of us, such as like Mario Gonzalez, if he's available to, because he's been around for years, man. I mean, he's since the 70s, 60s, and he knows the history a lot better, the legal history a lot better than a lot of us. Thank you.
Yeah, I do. Well, I just want to make a statement that we should be electing officials at large. We don't do that now, Patricia, but we should be. We don't do that now, but we should be, because that's how the Constitution reads, because we don't have those boundaries. Tina said that there's only 2 communities that should have, or that should be able to have representatives voted from at their community level, within their boundaries of their community level, and that's Retchert and Oglala Junior. And the remainder should be voted at large. And so I think that that should reflect that until our boundaries are established.
So those are good comments. I'm just going to let you know what the conversation was in the communities. And this is what they said: the distribution of powers. And that is the powers of the government of the Oglala Lakota Nation shall be divided up into 3 separate branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Except as provided in this Constitution, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the government shall be separated and distinct, and no branch shall exercise the powers properly belonging to either of the others. So the executive branch is what we heard a lot about in regards to yesterday's comments, is that it should be a business council versus an executive branch. So those were some of the suggestions yesterday, is to create legislative, which is us, council. And then executive, which is the president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, fifth member, that should be considered as a business council. And then the judicial. So all of these three branches, these people are elected by the people at large. So that was the suggestions given in regards to some of the comments we heard for the revisions under this Article 3. Okay? Powers of the council, the legislative branch. So, Miss Jackie.
Section 1 through Section 3 describes how the Oglala Sioux Tribal Council shall exercise their powers in negotiate with governments, to employ legal counsel, to approve or veto sale of land, to advise the Secretary of Interior, to make assignments of tribal land, to manage economic affairs and enterprises, to appropriate for public purposes, to levy taxes, and licenses fees, to remove trespassers and exclude the banished persons, to enact resolutions and ordinances, etc. Refer to page 5 for more detail and breakdown.
So on our copy with page 4, and it gives you all of the subsections.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. Keep doing this. So under the Constitution, under Article 3, if you go to page 4, it gives you all the subsections of that A through, I think it was W. Yep, W. So these are all the powers of the legislative branch, which is council. Any thoughts? Any revisions? So subsection A, to negotiate with the federal, state, local governments on behalf of the tribe and to advise and consult with the representatives of the Interior on all activities of the department that may affect the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation.
So this is like, we're just kind of responding to the governing body first, and then in that governing body section, section 8, members of the tribal council shall be elected for a term of two years. Mm-hmm. Did we say that we wanted to see that in the election code instead? And in fact, maybe even make it a 4-year terms with 2-year term limits, consecutive? I mean, that's what I think.
Okay. So the suggestion is to add term limits and to add the council shall serve 4-year terms. Are they staggered? Are they staggered? Staggered 4-year term limits? So those would be some of the suggestions that would be implemented here, because this is where we need to spell it out of how we operate as a government under this legislative body. Okay?
Can we back up a little bit here? Yeah. I just wanted to back up a little bit here because it looked like we missed a whole section right here on this section 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the, before you moved on to the powers of the council, because an important part in there under section 4 is that each recognized district shall elect representatives to the tribal council in the proportion of 1 representative for each 1,000 members. That's what it reads now. So I know listening to people when they come into my office, a lot of the complaints is that we have too many tribal council And then the other major complaint is that they're spending too much money on travel. So if we were going to fix that, don't you think we should go back here and say, well, why do we have to have a council member for each 1,000 members? Our tribe, we're the second largest reservation in the United States. And, you know, if we're spending too much money on this council, why can't we reduce that? Why can't it be one council member for every 3,000 members? You know, not 1,000, but 3,000. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah, and now I would like to jump to the powers of the council. I think that there should be some qualifications in there. Not only that, but the term limits and the ethics code must be established because, again, like what Arlene said, too much travel and very less money that goes down to the districts. And, you know, and I said this before, that the existing current operation of the government right now is, you know, I heard a lot of people, a lot of elders say that they just don't like the council and they don't want to vote. They don't want to go to meetings because they're never heard anyway. They never listen to them anyway. You know, and if they have medical needs as elders, they don't get the financial needs. You know, and they run to the district and they're out of money. They run to the tribal council and they have to go run through loops before, or if they get. And yet we see travel here, you know, retreats here, and we see it. And we hear what's going on. So we're the eyes and ears of the grassroots people. And that's why there's so much discontent and apathy of the council today.
Okay, thank you. So the suggestions is to put criteria there and also make sure that they're abiding by the ethics code that's in place. Go ahead.
I've noticed that there was a lot of times that I listen on the radio to the tribal council meetings, and I'm not sure if anybody else feels this way, but a tribal council a tribal council member as myself and others shouldn't feel they're being left out when the tribal council goes into executive meetings, and it feels like it shouldn't be in place. Because as far as a tribal council member is, I feel I should be part of the meeting throughout the whole time they start from the beginning to the end. And some of these executive meetings, I don't know, I haven't known any of them going to the next day. But that just, to me, I don't think executive sessions should be in place. Because as a tribal member, I would like to know what's going on, because they're also talking about our tribal members. And anybody out there that's non-tribal members, they're taking that chance when they come on our reservation to be within the tribal meetings. And I just don't feel executive sessions should be taking place.
Looking at this, I guess for the lack of a better phrase, the tribal council right now has supreme authority. They have say in everything that we do. So this powers of the tribal council, the first thing that should be established is separation of powers and strictly adhered to. We have a lot of, like I agree with what the ladies were saying, you know, the public puts you into these, put the tribal council into these positions, and we reserve that right to understand and to know everything that's happening in there. A lot of the things that go on in executive session, you know, to me, I feel are unfair. You know, it's because we don't, you know, there's major issues going on there, and some of this is going to cost somebody maybe an appointment, maybe it's going to cost somebody some land, or, you know, in today's day and age, you know, there's a lot of sexual things that happen within programs of the Oglala Sioux tribe, and they're handled in executive session, and I'm waiting to see something come out of that and some kind of action being taken, but nothing does. These people, these people that go into, cause them to go into executive session are still at work, so we need that separation of powers.
This is just kind of like a learning experience for me, but looking at this, this gives the council all the power over everything, you know, and when it should be the people. So there should be some kind of language in here where they're getting their approval or recommendations or whatever from the people before they come to this section. You know, instead of giving the council all of this power to do that, to do all of these things over the people of the reservation, programs or whatever, because what you see right now is that they're stepping into a lot of the programs, maybe good programs that are in there, and I think messing it up, you know, and just listening to council like she said. So actually the people have no say-so. So there should be some kind of language in there that gives the people that power. Thanks.
This is such a big section. You know, it goes all the way from 4, 5, 6, 3 pages there. And there's so many portions, like the section B. To me, there needs to be put a cap on that legal fee, because it seemed like when you listen to that council meeting, it's the attorneys. The attorneys are saying, do this, do that, and the council are just going along with what the attorneys say, and so it's like the attorneys are running our tribe here, you know, and we're spending a lot of money on those legal fees, because that's not cheap. So there needs to be a different way to do that. And then the next part, C, I think that needs to be removed. Remove that power from the council. And section D, we need to include the district governments in the formation of that indirect cost budget, because I don't know if I can speak for everyone, but in my experience, the districts, we are the poorest paid employees of the tribe. You know, and here we are, we're trying to provide all those services, and like, for example, I had somebody come into my office, and their little girl had a really severe health problem. You know, she's a little tiny girl, and they had their lights shut off. And so then we're trying to scramble around to try to find what resources are out there and help them. And so, you know, here we are, we're trying to do a lot of things, but we're paid the lowest one. Even our supplies, can't even afford office supplies. And so every year they negotiate that indirect cost budget with the Secretary of Interior, yet the districts are never included, their input on what do we need to provide these services for the people. And then I'm almost done here. Okay, and I would remove section F and G, and we need to update that section 8 because it's outdated, where it says require the performance of community labor in lieu thereof. You know, that was the language they used probably, I don't know, in the 50s or whatever. And section J, to me, that needs to be removed, because it's a loophole to keep the, you know, whenever the council sees that some of these things are going to be, you know, that power is going to be taken away, there's a loophole right there to keep it going. And Section K needs to have separation of powers away from the council. And like I agree with what Joanne said, we need to bring that power back to the people because that's the way our system was supposed to be. And L, that condemnation proceedings, we need to remove that language and put steps in to protect the rights of owners. You know, because these people, when they own a building, if you go out somewhere outside of the reservation and you own a building, you have certain, you know, there's rules and regulations that you have to abide by. The council can't just condemn it and come in and say it's mine now. You know, that part there needs to be changed. And this O, that's not enforced. And to regulate the activities and associations of thus chartered, that's not even enforced. S needs to be approved by the people at large. U needs to include separation of powers and not be under council authority. W needs to be approved by the people. And that Section 2, we need to remove that where it says the future powers and define it more.
I have a concern on this, on Section G here, to appropriate public purposes of the tribe, any available tribal council funds. There should be a negotiating existing today, or some type of negotiation with Lake Creek. Lake Creek, and you see a lot of surcharges and done on the Golden West too. So what's happening on that level? And another thing I have concern about is that when those FEMA trailers came in, I know I'm not a recipient of one, but I know I have relatives that got some of those FEMA trailers because of the bad weather that affected families. And because of the dire need, those trailers came in without regard for the family's income or their economic status. So now we're having to deal with high fees threatening for disconnect, even disconnect. And Lake Creek comes in and they add their charge to reconnect. You know, I think that should really be seriously looked at today, because, you know, the families have no choice but to accept that FEMA trailer, and it's all electric. Or there should be some provision in there where they can have alternative propane or wood. Yeah.
I'd like to make a statement about the council. Long time ago, there was like 2 councilmen for Pine Ridge and then 1 per district, and you know, it ran really good. I've been living on the reservation all my life, and I see a big change. And I was in office at the district level in Pine Ridge, and council never bothered, you know, with what was going on with this district. Now I see that they're interfering with everything that the district does. When a district can't make a decision on something and they come to a headlock, that's the only time they'll take it to the council for help. That's something that I would like to see the council not messing with at the district level.
I'd like to voice my opinion on some of these, or a section under that, under section, I guess we're going to enumerating powers of the council. And I'd like to have removed the ability to regulate and prohibit any leases not 5 years or older, or sold or encumbered. I think we should have that ability to not be able to sell the tribal land, but to remove the 5-year limit for leases. And like I said before, I also looked at to regulate and preserve, strengthen Native arts, crafts, cultures, and Lakota language. I don't think those should be regulated, in my opinion. They should just be out. That should be out. That's under N. As I said before, to regulate the inheritance of property, that should be out. That should be in a code, a inheritance code. And what about to regulate the domestic relations of members? What does that mean? Does that mean regulate who gets to marry whom? That's what it sounds like, or, you know. So that should be out. I mean, that's kind of like outdated. Yeah, sort of. And we have to remember where this came from. This came from the federal government. This document came from the federal government. And so we accepted it a long time ago. And so now's the time to change it. We change it for ourselves to operate better. We change it for our children to be able to operate within those confines.
I just have a couple comments. Number one is on page 3, section 5, I think that's obsolete. And I think that, I think this language pertains to the time when the districts were not in place and the superintendent and a committee determine membership. But I think membership will be determined by Article 2. So I think that section is obsolete. And the other thing I wanted to mention is Article 6, where it gives the districts a lot of authority. And I think if this document empowers Article 6, given the districts the authority to govern their own communities, there will be no need for 19 council. There will be need for 9 council to be spokespersons for those 9 districts. And so you would cut down on the council numbers and empowering the districts more, if that's what this document is to be for, to giving the power back to the people.
Okay, I just wanted to say something, because under Article 6 of the Wakpamni District Constitution, it says that we cannot be inconsistent with the tribal constitution. What we were talking about before, about giving the council has a lot of power, I think that we're kind of, this is my own thoughts, we're going kind of backwards, because we as the districts represent, whether there's boundaries or not, you know, right now we're districts. In our district we have 6 communities, and so we represent the people of our district. And so we should be amending, revising, or whatever, our own constitution, and then bringing it here to this constitutional revision. That's how I feel anyway. So we're kind of backwards a little bit.
Okay, we have one more comment and then we'll move on.
There's a lot in here that can be discarded, but the one main thing that stands out to me is taxes. Does the Oglala Sioux tribe have a tax commission?
We have a revenue office. Oh, sorry. So that's a good question. Levy taxes. But yeah, in our treaties we have a commerce clause. We are not to charge our tribal membership taxes. However, we made a compact with the state. And in this compact, we charge our tribal members, but not non-tribal members, these taxes. So you got to keep in mind, We have not exercised our rights in this Constitution. We need to make it so it protects our people. So when we say levy taxes, well, we're kind of violating our own agreement with the treaties in charging taxes on our people, but we've done it, right? And we've been operating that way. So, okay, how do we fix it? And then how do we prevent adding more and more taxes on a population that is already at poverty level? So these are things that we need to be looking at as we look at these guidelines in regards to the legislative body making laws. And these laws have to protect our people.
So I'm all for taxes myself. You know, everybody has to pitch in something. But having a structured, legitimate tax commission, you know, then we can say who, what, and where has to pay that tax. So if we can establish that tax commission there, Minerals Department, and Natural Resources.
Yep, I agree. So these were some of the other recommendations that came out of this from the other ones, and I'm not going to go through it, but this is where it says for the legislative. Now this is just the enumerated powers for council. Shall consist of one legislative body called the Council of the Oglala Lakota Nation. Section 2, council should establish rules for its credentials, meaning criteria. We heard a lot of our people saying tribal council should have some type of education, a minimum of an AA, because they're dealing with all of these various levels, okay? So to establish that criteria, and it's based upon what people have been saying. Council shall consist of 9 members, maybe, okay? Because we're hearing a lot of that, who are citizens by blood of the Oglala Lakota Nation, okay? And they will serve for, you know, the 25 years, that's kind of been the census of age, that they are elected for 4 years, that there is term limits set in, like the suggestions is if they serve 2 terms consecutively, they have to sit out maybe a term before they can run again. Those were some of the suggestions. So these are languages in regards to the criteria of just the legislative body. The other thing is that there has been discussion about having at large 2 candidates kind of voted at large by our membership who reside off the reservation, because we have a lot of our people, our tribal relatives who live off the reservation but want to have an opportunity to vote. And so there was discussion about that. Section 4, that they have, you know, 1 regular session every month, 2/3 of the members. You know, traditionally within our culture, when we talk about leadership and how we work together as leaders within these societies, it was consensus rule, not majority. And today we go by majority rule of 2/3 vote. So that was a lot of discussion, and to keep it at 2/3 vote of the legislative body to pass any legislation. It goes on, special meetings, to define the criteria for special meetings, like you guys talked about. We go into an executive session, and you don't know what's going on in executive session. The only time we need to go into executive session is when it deals with a personnel, confidential information based upon personnel. That's the only time that we should be going into executive session. For example, that's just an example, okay? Section 6, that they're open to the public, like I said, except when concerning employment, retention, or discharge of personnel, okay? And typically, it's a director who's needing assistance going to the executive director, you know, that chain of command. Number 7, council shall have the power to establish laws that shall deem necessary and proper for the good of the nation, and shall not be contrary to the provisions of this Constitution. And so when we do a resolution or ordinance, it shall be enacted by the Oglala Lakota Nation on, and resolution shall be resolved by the Oglala Lakota Nation. No laws passed by council shall have retroactive effect or on operations. So all of this stuff was what the suggestions were brought up to us by the people. Judicial powers. We're moving forward now.
Section 1 through Section 7 describes the breakdown of the judicial powers of the Oglala Sioux Tribe and the powers of the Supreme Court, the inferior tribal court, and compensation, removal and vacancies of the Supreme Court.
So when we talked about separation of powers, I think that also needs to spell out, there's no true, right here we have a separation of the judicial to a certain extent. We have no separation for the executive branch. They're absorbed within the legislative branch with council. So for example, the president cannot act unless he or she receives a resolution from council to act on that matter. Okay? President has no veto power. Sole purpose in the roles and responsibilities of that particular position, and we'll get into that later in the Constitution, but keep this in mind, is this is where we need to kind of separate out those powers. So we're now at judicial, and this is where we hear, how are the courts separated from tribal council? And we heard earlier the comment that tribal council is the supreme power of the land. They're the ultimate authority. So when we come to the separation of powers under the judicial, this is where we make the revisions to keep those separation of powers and create checks and balances. So starting with section 1, you see the creation of the tribal courts, the Supreme Court, jurisdiction. Section 3 is the powers of the Supreme Court. And underneath that, there are subsection A through D. And then look at D. The justices of the Supreme Court shall be appointed to the Supreme Court by tribal council and shall serve a 6-year term. Now, is it truly separation of powers when tribal council is selecting the Supreme Court? So what do we need to do? So, who should select the Supreme Court justice? Oh, God. It's too small for me to read. Should the people select them? Should they be voted at large? That's what most municipalities do. Hold on.
How about the district council? All of them. That would be awesome.
So when you're asking about district council, are you talking about the chairs from each of the districts that come together, that form that district council, if you will? Like what they call today the Crazy Horse Planning Commission.
That and a few others sitting on that council executive board.
Okay. So that's the suggestions that our judges, and how many judges do we have in our Supreme Court? 3. So should they all serve a 6-year term? Should they be staggered terms? Should it be 6 years or more? So what we're hearing is that they're selected by the district council, that they are staggered terms, and that it shouldn't be a minimum of 6 years, but maybe we look at 10 and stagger them down so that you have some continuity with the Supreme Court, the higher courts.
Just making a suggestion, how about if all of that is within a document or code on how to carry out that process and established by, say, the executive boards? Not just the chairman, not just, you know, the Crazy Horse Planning Committee, but, you know, by the boards themselves. So there's a variety of individuals sitting on there making a decision and having the knowledge about how it could be and how it should, you know, what things happen. Yeah, having that knowledge is really important.
Be knowledgeable in traditional law.
Did it die? Let me try to.
I like the idea of the district board selecting a chief judge. But how would that happen, you know, by community vote? The second thing I'd like, the judicial powers, I would like to maybe see that taken away from the sitting committees, the standing committees. Take that away from them. Anything, any type of litigation or personnel process shouldn't be handled in Law and Order Committee or any other committee. So yeah, that's one of my thoughts.
Okay, good. I just want to take a minute to welcome Little Wound High School government class who's just now joining us, and we're really happy that you're here. We are on Article 5, Judicial Powers, and we're talking about the higher courts. And how do we create separation of powers? And we have some really good suggestions in regards to how do we do the selection? What should be the term limits? And also, how do we keep them checks and balances with that? And taking away the council as a part of the selection process. So that's where we are with Article 5. So we have those suggestions, and that is, if you look, turn to page 7 on your constitutions. And that is subsection D. So this is what stemmed the conversation. So instead of just having 6-year terms, we're looking at staggered terms, and that might be 10 years to 6 years, staggered terms, because we have 3 chief judges in our Supreme Courts. Okay? All right. Powers. Section 4, powers of the inferior tribal court. The inferior tribal court shall exercise the following powers. Now, what is inferior courts? Our lower courts, right? Our civil courts, so forth, juvenile courts, those are the lower courts. Criminal court. However, the term inferior, what does that say to you? Less than. So is it less than services you're going to receive? Anyway, just a thought in regards to the reference to inferior courts. So maybe the name needs to be changed. Some constitutions in other tribal nations refer to the lower courts as district courts because they serve our people in our district. So that's why they refer to them as district courts. That's just an idea. So let's look at subsection A. Inferior tribal court should have the power to make findings of fact, conclusion of law, and shall have the power to issue all remedies in law and in equity, including injunctive, declaratory relief, and all rights, including attachments, and basically it's like changes mandamus. Any suggestions, revisions?
Yeah, I have a maybe an idea that we can somehow interject the Major Crimes Act under this judicial powers aspect of it, because there's a lot of our people being lost to the federal system when they're not introduced to our tribal court system yet, and basically they're railroaded into the federal penal system, and that should be held by our tribal courts first.
Any other comments? Okay. Section B. Inferior tribal court shall have the power to declare laws of the Oglala Sioux tribe void if such laws are not in agreement with the Constitution. It's good? Move on? Okay. Subsection C. The chief judge of the inferior tribal court shall oversee the administration of justice of the inferior tribal courts, must have a Juris Doctorate from an ABA accredited law school, must be licensed to practice law in any state or federal jurisdiction.
Again, that should not be within this document. It should be within a code on how to select and remove and identify the vacancy.
You know, I don't know what section it's supposed to be in. I know it's in this judicial somewhere. But just from experience, dealing with this court out here recently, there's something missing where the fines for these the excessive fines for we live in a poverty-stricken area, and something needs to be done about that. So somewhere in here we have to be able to monitor. Somebody has to monitor what's going on with those judges' decisions and how they're putting excessive fines, and I don't see in the custody process, you know, like if say a grandma has to take care of her grandchildren, I don't see in there where they even have a what you call that, where they reform them, where they say, well, this parent needs to go to parenting class, or, you know, something within a certain amount of time so that they can work towards getting their children back, you know, work towards fixing themselves. And so somewhere in there we need to be able to fix that. I don't know where it goes, but it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, my comment on this will be the nepotism. The nepotism of the council, because they're on the council, then they have relatives that never had a job before that are selected to be either a judge or secretary or something. So I don't see any powers of the council addressing that issue.
So the recommendation is that a committee needs to kind of hold the checks and balances as to the lower court's decisions or as to how they're made. So there needs to be a monitoring that's going on with that to to that extent, if these individuals, it doesn't state that they have to have a Juris Doctorate in the lower courts, just the Superior Court. So should that be a criteria? When you said they've never had a job, but yet they're selected as a judge, then should criteria be put on the judges in the lower courts? And then where does custom law come into play? Customary law. Unchi is taking care of her takojas. Unchi needs to take her grandchildren to the hospital, but legally, she doesn't have custody. So where does customary law fall within this Constitution?
The court, I'm working with Betty Goins, and we're establishing a peacemaking court that would address what they were talking about, you know? And there would be no criminal things, you know, attached to it. It would be a mediation. Mediation, work with them, counseling, set guidelines down, and if they don't want to follow that, then they would revert back to criminal court. But they will have a choice. The money's there, it's just the time, and it could be made up of people like Pat, or, you know, different people with different expertise could be sitting on a court case for a certain case. So there is things like that in the works. Okay.
Good. Good. So we talk about our customary law. Customary law is part of that peacemaking process. We're looking at arbitration versus retribution, and there's a big difference between the two. And so when we want to incorporate that by having an option, and actually, to be honest with you, my master's thesis was on peacemaking. And so with that, a lot of judicial systems have developed and adopted our practices. So for example, a lot of the juvenile courts in Minnesota, even in Rapid City, are using our customary law in their courts. So it's good that finally we're moving in that direction in our own tribal courts as to the peacemaking courts. And usually, typically, it starts with the juvenile, the civil, and then we move into the criminal. So with that, that's a good outcome. I'm really excited and happy about that. But as far as criteria, is there any criteria that we want to add to this? To the lower courts? Who selects the lower court judges now? Well, what does D say?
I believe that the courts should be, the judges should be selected by the people and voted across the board for all positions. I believe also that to be in a lower court, from the lowest court, maybe even an advocate, all the way up to the Supreme Court judge, they should all have some type of law degree background, maybe an AA for the advocates and a doctorate's degree for the judges. And I also believe that all of these set appointments should be Oglala Lakota members. You know, if we're gonna, you know, I just heard that they're paying this court judge an extremely high amount of money. Where does he come from? Who is he? You know, I know that a lot of our kids, like from the Little One School here, and I'd like to say welcome to you guys. Thank you for coming and getting involved with the community and the governance aspect of our community.
Yes.
But all of our kids, they've always go to get these huge educations, and they come back and they can't even get in. There's no room for them here. We have to push all these non-tribal members, mainly, you know, out of the way to put our children in there, and they should be Oglala Lakota members.
Okay. So that should be one of the criteria. Okay.
One here, Tina.
And also, going along with Mr. Long over there, not only they should be tribal members, also they should have extensive knowledge of the traditional laws, the traditional history, and have some people out there to really investigate what they're going to make a decision on. Because we went through that. We had an older granddaughter, raised her since she was a baby. She turned 11 years old. All of a sudden, the father wanted to be a father and went to the court. And the judge is not even a tribal member, didn't even know who we were as a strong Lakota family. And then he turns around and gives her back. And I haven't got to see my granddaughter since then. So those are things that I really look at and think about, because we push the education for our children, and when they come home, there's nothing here. So those are things and I strongly believe that the people should make the choice to place those judges, not the council, because the people put the council in, but somehow that power gets overpowering and they get pushed on, stepped on. So those are things that, as myself, I've been working with these students in tribal government and native studies to open their eyes, because in 10 years they're going to be in that place. 5, 10 years, they're going to be making those, it's going to affect them. So it's starting to trickle down the hill. So that's my comment on that.
Good. Okay, moving on to section 5, compensation. Tribal council shall have the power to establish the level of compensation for justice of the Supreme Court, judges of the inferior courts, provided that compensation due to each justice and judge shall not be diminished during the justice or judge's appointment. So who determines compensation? Section 5. Council does. So if we're creating separation of powers, then should council determine their compensation?
I think it should be in the code, and I also think it should be removed from this Constitution.
Okay, good. All right. Section 6, removal. Tribal council may remove any justice of the Supreme Court or any judge of the inferior tribal courts by 2/3 vote for subsection A, unethical judicial conduct. Subsection B, physical or mental disability which prevents the performance of judicial duties. C, persistent failure to perform judicial duties. D, gross misconduct that is clearly prejudicial to the administration of the justice.
I think Section 6 should be removed in its entirety. As it is, the tribal council has too much authority over everything, and if they're going to be elected by the people, then it should be the people who removes them also.
Wait. Hold on.
Yeah, well, you know, a few minutes ago we talked about Denise mentioned that, when selecting the judges, maybe it should be gone back to the district council, because it's instead of, if you're going to change inferior court to district tribal court, then if they're the ones that are hiring these judges, then that removal should also take place there.
I just have a comment about that too. Right now, the way our council is the supervisors of those judges, that's not a very fair system. And so we need to make it where it's the people who elect. This power needs to come back to the people. And as districts, I don't know if you guys are all familiar with it, but districts really like to fight too. So I think to be more fair, we would need to put it on the shoulders of the people. Let them elect them, and let them take them out if they want to take them out.
Another thing that I was thinking about sitting here is that a lot of these, if we turn it back to the people to remove a sitting judge, that can take an extremely long period of time. One way that we can alleviate that is to have a panel of lower court sitting justices meet and discuss the removal of a higher court judge.
Okay. Alrighty. I would like for us to, let's see. We've got one more section, section 7, vacancies. And then after we do vacancies, then we'll have a prayer, we'll get some lunch, and then we'll move on with Article 6, district organizations, because we're going to have a working lunch. We need to be out of here by 3. And remember, we have 17 articles in this Constitution. So we're going to try to speed through this, and it's good discussion, good comments. And so with that in mind, let's move to section 7, vacancies. If there is any vacancy, the tribal council shall appoint a justice of the Supreme Court or a new judge of an inferior tribal courts for unexpired term. If the vacancy involves the chief judge of the inferior tribal courts, the tribal council shall appoint a new chief judge who satisfies all the requirements necessary for chief judge for the unexpired term.
Here you go, Pat. I think we need to implement the separation of powers strongly in there so that the council doesn't have that supreme law or authority to select and remove. That needs to be taken out, I think.
So help us with this. So the selection is going to be at large by the people. They're going to have the checks and balance and oversight of the district Crazy Horse Commission. And then if there's a vacancy in either of the courts that happens during their time frame and it's not expired, then who then becomes responsible for finding the judge to fill that position until the term's up?
If the people are electing these judges, then it should be run like any other election. The second highest vote getter should fill that remaining term limit.
Well, with that,
And also when this happens, when you have a vacancy, every 2 years one gets put out, then a new order of council comes in, and they put the same person back in. That should be looked at to keep that from happening, to get the repeaters We get one term, they do something, they get terminated, wait a couple years, next term they're back in there again. So that's something that should be looked at too.
Yeah, my mom just brought up a good point, is that with that highest vote getter comment, that was, I think Sam said that, you know, the people don't know who's the highest vote getter in there. And so I don't think that would be a very fair system to put in there. It's, you know, we have that election, and the people need, that power needs to come back to the people again.
All right. No more discussion on that? Okay. At this point, Melvin, will you bless us with the meal prayer, and we'll have lunch? Will everybody get their lunch, sit back down, and then we'll start on Article 6, okay?
Wana ucheke wa chima mcham pilama aplo. Ho takashla te wa kantaka particular na ha oyati wichaku na tankashla wopila tanka na ha wana wota na woyote kilehe wakana apia takashla na ha lakile wo api tanka wankap takashla na ha dwa iapi na dwa wankap na Tawanchi washte wichaku takashla na Tribal Council na oyate pikile na owanka po takashna wicha kapo na ahu matake asi.
Our elders and our youth first, and then the rest can get in line. Thank you.